All right, so for the example today, for lecture, we're going to be building off of the example from yesterday. So I had made a couple minor changes. You could do git pull if you have the repo open. You do git pull to get the latest. But even if you don't do that, it'll work just the same. So we'll start with what we were doing before, and then we'll kind of review what it looks like, and then talk about how we might add some functionality and then make some changes. So from Monday, we talked about components, which are the basic kind of building blocks of making React apps, and then props and state. Does anyone remember what props and or state is?
Props are the things that get passed from one component to the next.
Yep.
Down from parent to child.
Exactly. And what about state?
If something is going to change, our example, has the background color there. It's what the current value or the current, the current value of that would be. It could be more than one.
Okay. Yes. So you can have more than one key in the state object. Anyone else tell me more about state?
It's like the properties of the instance of the class.
Yeah. So state is restricted. You could think of them as private. They're private properties of the instance. So props is a way of communicating information from one component to another, as Jess said, down. So you can transmit from parent to child using props. State will be internal to a component. So state is internal to a component. It's private. And what does state do? And what is it for?
It holds variables.
Okay. Yep. So it holds, it can hold anything really, any kind of JavaScript thing.
It seems like that's what makes it dynamic too. Like that's what makes the whole thing changeable.
Yes. Yeah. So state is some piece of information that you want in your component that will be changeable. So if a user clicks on something and you change the background color, in our kind of toy example here, that would be, you would want that color to be part of state. So anything that will change. So how does that change occur? We haven't really talked about this, but the way, and again, we don't need to go into great detail because I also don't understand in great detail, but React, there's the actual DOM in your browser, and then React creates a virtual DOM, which is an in-memory representation of the DOM. It's much, much faster to manipulate that in-memory representation than it is to manipulate the actual DOM. So when you change state, that will trigger a re-render of the component. Basically, you can think of it as like creating a new instance of the component with the updated information. So if you have state and the background color is red here initially, and you do something to change that state and that color becomes green, React will basically kind of recreate that component, but now this value will be green instead of red. And we'll talk about things like life cycle methods and hooks in the coming days and weeks. But there's a whole process. There's a whole series of events that are triggered that you can hook into or tap into or override, as we saw with Django, right? Where you can, when the form is saved, there are Django under the hood calls a whole bunch of functions that you can override and tap into. So there's something similar with React. So if you change the state, React knows I need to basically refresh this component or re-render this component. So re-renders are how React, is dynamic. But changing state isn't the only thing that will trigger a re-render. There are, and we'll see some more examples. So a change in state doesn't just trigger a re-rendering of the component, but also any children in that component. So if you have a very high level component and you change the state there, then every single component in that, every single child and every child of that child will also re-render or refresh by default. There are ways of hooking into this and changing that behavior, but that's the default.
Sorry, Chad, I missed
Yeah.
it. Can you say one more time? You said if the state changes, then every component and every child of that component changes as well?
Well, they don't necessarily change. Depends on what you mean by change, but they
I
won't.
mean, re-render.
They will, yeah, they will re-render. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
And also a change in props will also do the same thing. So if I'm passing down props to something, we'll look at another example, but let's see my app, I'm passing down props from the app to this color changer. If for whatever reason, however, this were to change, I were to change the props that I'm passing down, that would trigger a re-render in Colorchanger. So this is something you don't really need to start worrying about it now, but we're going to look at the dev tools. So, but one of the problems you'll encounter, one of the challenges you'll encounter in developing React applications is this like infinite re-rendering of things, or this, even if it's not infinite, just excessive re-rendering. It's easy to write a React application that works, but that's very inefficient or doing a lot of unnecessary work. Okay, so let's just review this application real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. So npm run start. Okay, so we have this component here, and if I click on the button, the color changes. So right now, that's all it does. So we have here, we're still using class-based components. So today we're still going to stick with class-based components. Starting on Thursday, we'll talk about function and class-based components. So here, app is a class-based component. We have the render method, which is the one necessary method for a class-based component. And the return value will be some kind of JSX. I'm returning a single div here. I always have to return a single element. The div can contain as many elements as you like. This is what looks like a p tag, and then here also is another component called color changer. So what is the title here?
That's a prop.
Yeah, this is a prop that I'm passing down from the parent. So this is like a keyword argument when I'm creating an instance of this color changer. So now color changer will have something called title and its props. So it gets the props object for free because it's extending from the React component or inheriting from the React component. So if I go to color changer, I know it's going to have something called this dot props dot title, which I'm actually going to be using here. So this dot props dot title. And I have state here. So this is one way, we talked about this a little bit last night, but you can do things like, so this is slightly older. Basically, you don't have to do this anymore, but you can have a constructor. So constructor with props, and then you call super, and then you do this dot state here, but you don't have to do that. You can, but you don't have to do that now. So we have state, which is a special, it's a special thing in React. And state can contain whatever we want it to contain. And then how do we change state?
Use the set state method.
Yeah, we have to use the set state method. We don't directly change state. So use this set state method, and then it will do a shallow merge of this object. So we only have to specify what we're changing. Okay. So the way this component works, so this has some other stuff here, some other functions, but ultimately here's the render and the return. So we are returning yet another div, which is going to show up inside right here. So this div is going to have what looks like a p tag with the title and then a button. And this button, we're giving it an event handler, which is called handle click. And in that handle click, we're just setting the background color to green. Any questions about that so far?
Where's the title, the props that title coming from one more time?
Yeah, so props, where do props always come from?
The parent.
Yeah. So the parent, so in the app.js, we're basically creating an instance of Colorchanger here inside of app. And when we create that instance, we're passing it something, which will be included on the props object. So this dot props, again, kind of like state. So this dot state and this dot props, you're going to get for free automatically. And then title or whatever else we want to include here will be included in the props object. Okay, so let's take a look. So we have, you may or not have downloaded React DevTools, but I would recommend it. Makes things a lot easier, especially as things get more complicated. So we have this component, and I can see this gives me a quick overview of the hierarchy of my application. So app, the top level, and then within app, I have this Colorchanger component. So I can see the app. I have, if I look at Colorchanger, I can see that it has props. So it has title, and there's the title, Colorchanger component, which is exactly what I'm passing in there. And it also has state, which is current background color, and that's set to red. And it tells me what it's rendered by. So this Colorchanger is rendered by app, meaning that it's inside of app. And what happens if I click this button, I can see the state change here. So that's fairly straightforward. But it's nice to see, especially when, again, when things get more complicated. So there's something else you can, so there's the components. Once you install React DevTools, there's also this profiler. So you can use the profiler to give you some more information about what your app is doing, which can be handy as you're developing. So I'm going to start recording. So the way this works is you start recording and then you do whatever on your app and then you stop recording. And then you'll get some information about how your app was behaving. So I'm going to start recording. I'm just going to click that. I guess that worked. And I will stop. And then I'm going to get this display. So you might need to change. In case I have in the settings here, I have on profiler, I've clicked record why each component rendered while profiling. So by default, that won't be checked. Okay. So this is not so exciting, but app is telling me the app did not render. So I recorded and then I clicked the button. So app didn't render while I was recording. It had already rendered and it didn't refresh or re-render because nothing in app changed. Nothing in app changed that would cause a re-render. App doesn't have state, so it couldn't have changed the state. And it doesn't have any props that it could have changed. So app didn't re-render, but this component did. The color changer did, and I get this information. Why did it render? It's because the state changed. So in this component, the color changer component, I clicked the button, which triggered my handler, the handle click, which called set state, which changed my state, which triggered a re-render of color changer. So color changer re-rendered, and I can see that here. I can see that it re-rendered, and I can see, why it re-rendered, and I get some timing information. I wouldn't worry too much about making this efficient. The profiler is good. Just I think is another kind of dev tool. I wouldn't stress about efficiency right now. Okay. So what I want to do now is I want to start breaking this up into components. So I have this color changer. It's my only component. Well, aside from app, it's my only subcomponent. But I want to start breaking this apart into smaller components. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a button component because this looks to me like it could be pulled out. So I'm going to go into components and create button.js. So I'm going to import, I will import component from React. And then I'm going to create a class called button, and that's going to inherit from or extend component. And then what is the method I always need in a class component?
Render.
Okay, render. And that render is going to return some JSX. And then I also need to export button. So export T. I'm going to export button. And then I'm going to pull out this right here. And this also relies on, so I'll pull this out first. This will be the button. So I'm going to return this button. I'm also going to take this styles with me. And then I have this handle click. Handle click changes my state. So I'm actually going to take all of this stuff with me. I'm going to put this into my component here. Let me fix the spacing a little bit. Okay, and then if I want to use button here, I'm going to have to import it. So import button, and this auto fills here. And then button will go right here. So this should work the same. Okay, so that changes colors. And if I go to the components, I can see that before I just had app and color changer. Now I have this additional component. So color changer has props, but now it doesn't have state. And button has no props, but it has state. And if I change this, then this changes. So now I have this color changer right here. Oops, sorry. I have this button right here, which has state. So the button itself will change. And color changer is going to render button. Now let's say I also want to have well, for one, let's say I don't want to just render one button. I want a whole bunch of buttons. I want 3 buttons. So I can take care of that here. I can write a function called create buttons. And then create buttons. I want to have 3 different colors to choose from instead of just changing it from red to green or whatever. I want to have it have a little bit more variety. So const colors. So I'm going to create an array red. So then I have this colors array. So if I want to create a bunch of buttons, I can map over colors. So return. And map will take a callback function. So the first parameter will be each individual item in turn. So color. And then I want to create an instance of button. And I want every button, let's say, to know what color it is. So it knows what to do. So I'll pass in the color as a prop. Okay, and in order to render those buttons here in the color changer component, I'm going to call this function here. So this dot create buttons. And now if I take a look at this, so I have a warning here. So the warning says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So you can get away with not doing this, but we'll fix this problem. So button, so we basically need to pass this a key. And this is something that React will use basically to control rendering. So React knows what's on the DOM. So give this a unique key. I'm going to use the index button dash. I'm going to save this and refresh, and that warning goes away. I can change all of these. All of these are independent, right? If I go look at components, I can see that here's the key that I gave it. So this is the unique identifier. They all have a state. If I change this one, the other ones don't change. So now I've got 3 components. So I go over to button, and instead of setting the current background color to green, I'm going to set it to, well, let me change this. I'll start it at gray, and then this will be, what could this be?
It's the prop.
Orange.
So this dot prop dot color or something like that.
Okay. Okay. Now, when I change this, it changes to the appropriate color. So the props for this one is red, props for this one is orange. If I change this, the background color changes from gray to orange. Okay, any questions so far? So we've got app. If we look at the hierarchy of our components, we have app at the top, which isn't really doing much. Color changer, which is kind of like so far it's like a container for everything else. And then we have our 3 buttons inside of color changer. All right, so let's add another component inside color changer. So we have the title here, and I want to do something like page 1. This is, that won't be the prettiest, but and I want to do something like the current color is whatever the current color is. So if someone has clicked on a button, I want that color to be displayed. Feel like maybe I'm stuck here. I don't know how I can access. I don't know how I can access that color. So button, an individual button knows about its color, but I need to pass information from a sister component. So let me refresh this. Color changer button. Let me try, actually, I'm gonna go ahead and create a component here, just so it'll show up in the DevTools. So I'm gonna create a component called display color. So we'll import component. From React. And I'll create a class called display color. I'll inherit from component. I'm going to add a render method, which will return some JSX, which I'll put right there. And then I'm going to export it. And then in Colorchanger, I'm going to do display color, which auto imported very nicely right there. So now if I refresh, it should look the same, but my hierarchies changed a little bit. So now I have app at the top and then Colorchanger. And then I have these sister components. So button, or all the buttons, they're on the same level as display color. And I want to have something I do in this component. I want information from this component to be available in this component. Does anyone know how we might do that?
Using lift?
Yeah, so we'll have to lift the, so this is a pattern, it's a pattern. So we'll have to lift the state out of, because information only flows down, right? In React, information only flows from a parent to a child. So if I want to share information between two children, I'm gonna have to lift everything up into a common parent or a common ancestor. So all of the stuff that I'm doing with button, all that hard work of moving everything into here, into its own component, I'm going to have to undo some of that. So I'm going to need Colorchanger now. Colorchanger is going to have to be responsible for knowing what the current color is. Colorchanger needs to know what the color is so that it can tell both display color and the button. So button basically needs to tell Colorchanger what the current color is, and then Colorchanger needs to pass that information to display color as a prop. So we're gonna have to pull this out. The way we do that is I'm gonna take the state, I'm gonna go into Colorchanger, and I'm gonna add this state here. So I have the current background color here. And this handle click, I'm also gonna pull out. So the handle click is now going in there. And I think the styles can stay, but it's no longer, it can't get this information from state anymore. So we don't have state and button anymore. So we're gonna have to pass that information down. And it looks like we already have that here. So color, so we can get that from props actually. So this dot props dot color. And we have to now worry about this click handler. So we have a click handler, but the click handler is now up here in the parent component. So how do we deal with this situation?
Can you pass it in as a prop?
Yes, yeah. You can pass in a function as a prop. So we can do here is we will add another a prop here, and we can do key color, and we'll call it handle. Yeah, call it handle click. And because I've written this as an arrow function, I can just pass it in. So this dot handle click. And then the handle click let's see here. So I'm going to also add a handler here. So on click. So I'm basically going to add a local wrapper handler here. So this will be handle button click. I'll call this something slightly different. Equals. And then from there, I will call this dot props dot handle click. And I will call it with this dot props dot color. And then the on click handler I'm going to put here will be this dot handle button click. So what I've done, let me just double check. This didn't break. Okay. So let me take another look at this. So we've got color changer. We have state here. We're going to handle the click, set state. This dot create buttons. This dot handle click.
I think you need to pass in the state current background color as a prop, and then change the button to use that initially.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry, can you say that one more time?
The button component does not know about the state that the current background color is gray.
Right, right.
So you need to pass in the current background color as a prop.
Yes.
Is there a better way to do props than one after another like that?
One after like this.
Yeah, they're all separated there. Is there a better way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, you could for I think you do something like this. Sorry, just give me one sec. So handle click.
Handle click doesn't need parentheses after it, right?
Right, that's correct. that we're not worrying about that right now. The button. Yeah. Let me.
You want the buttons to be gray at first?
Yeah, let me just try. I think I was doing too much copy pasting. Let me try this. Okay, let me check the state here. Red. Yeah, the state is still undefined here. Sorry. So current background. The color changer starts out gray. When I click, should set. Yeah, sorry. Handle click. So the button, the handle click. Yeah, sorry. Again, copy paste. Okay, so the state, I apologize for that. So I had just copy pasted. So I need to actively be grabbing this color. So I was this dot props dot color, which doesn't exist, so it was undefined. So when I was changing the state, I was changing the background color to undefined every time. So we're at this point now where we have these components. We have display color and this button, and I can change my state, but it doesn't do anything. I want to change this component when I do something to change the button. I want the display color to change. So display color, I'm going to need to pass it a prop, and I'm going to do, I'll just call it color, and this is going to have to come from state. So this dot state dot current background color. So when the state changes, it will trigger a re-render. So this changes from gray to red. It will trigger a re-render, which will also trigger a re-render with the new updated props here in display color. And then display color will pick up the props. So this dot props dot color. So the current color is gray. I click it and it orange, green, whatever. So I had, so I created a diagram, which is probably should have used earlier, but the way this is working is we have our app, which is the top level. We have change color, which is this kind of container component, which has two children, has some buttons, and it has a display color component. We had to, before we had state, basically state and the handler were in the button. And so you could click the button, call the handler, and change the state all within the button. But that doesn't work because we want display color to be able to change accordingly. So we have to pull these things up. And when we do that, we kind of, we have this like shadow. Let me. So we have this handle. You basically like pass down a handler to the button, and the handler can get called, which will call the handler here, which will change the state. And then this state is actually, it's getting, I'm going to do the same thing here. It's getting passed down, but now it's not state because state doesn't get passed down, but it's props. So this state is getting passed down as props to display color. So we have this app and then change color. And in order for this to change something in this, for two sister components to change something, they have to pull it up, or hoist it or lift it into a common ancestor. And then you pass a callback function as a prop. And then you can change the state, and the state will trigger a re-render, which will resend the props, which will re-render the other component. So I'm gonna just make this a little bit more colorful. So let's see, color changer. Let me get rid of that. So you can also, I'll change this here. Subtitle. Okay, so now I can see this. And when I click this, these things I'll change. And we can look at the profiler. This will give us another. I'm going to start recording. I'm just going to click on stop recording. We can see the re-renders. So the app doesn't render because the app isn't receiving any props that are changing. It doesn't have any state that's changing. It's not the child component of another component that is changing. So app doesn't change, it stays gray. Color changer does change, and it tells us why. Why did it render? Because the state changed. So if we look at color changer, the state changed right here, current background color. It changed, indirectly, but so it changed, which triggers a re-render. That re-render triggers this, so display color re-renders because it got new props, it got updated props. If we look at display color, it has this prop called color. And because the color is the state, when the state changes, then these props are now different. And because the props are different, this component is going to re-render. And then here we have this button, and the buttons re-render because the parent component re-rendered. So these didn't change, but they re-rendered anyway, just because they were children of a component that did re-render. So you could actually, well, we'll talk about lifecycle methods later, but you can prevent that from happening, like that unnecessary rendering. But You don't need to worry about that. It's not like, it's not time consuming. But I think the dev tools are very handy, especially as things get more complicated. So are there any questions about props or state or sharing information?
So you're not, sharing information, but it's almost like you have to design your components to know what functions need to reside at the parent as you're designing it all.
Yeah, so it's, so React has, so state is obviously very important to React. And there are a lot of other third-party libraries, things like Redux that handle basically global, it's like a global state handler, because you have this issue where you have state local to a component, but I want a change here to trigger a change in this other component, and it's 5 levels deep and it's over here. So to kind of do that by hand, okay, great. Now I have to figure out wherever the common parent is, and then it creates other issues, which we'll talk about later. Called one of them is called prop drilling, where you end up passing all this information from component to child unnecessarily, just because there's farther down the line a component needs this information. So as things get more complicated, this is an issue that you'll run into, and there's the context API in React, which is basically like, it's kind of like a global state container, and Redux is a more complicated version of that kind of thing. But I wouldn't worry about those things right now. But yeah, so yeah, ideally you would design all this stuff ahead of time, but I think in practice you'll find that, oh, wait a minute, now I have this other, because maybe you start with something that you think is going to be a component, and then you realize you can subdivide it into other components and so on. So if you just had if you put everything in app, right? Am I still sharing my screen? Yes, I think so. So if you put everything in app, you had everything in app, you could just have one state there and everything would be simple, right? You wouldn't have to worry about any of these other things. But the trade-off is that, you just have one huge blob. All right, I'll stop sharing now.